Ranking review.
Making review.
Ranking review.
Say 6.
6,
5.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Hello, kids. You have found your way to the 41st episode of Rank and Review. And our returning guest, Lee Beckman, and I are going to discuss John Carpenter. 6 celebrated and not so celebrated genre movies from John Carpenter. The music you're hearing behind me, coincidentally, is not the typical collaborator who does the music for my show, El Heavy. No. This time around, we're actually playing some John Carpenter for you because the man, at the ripe old age of whatever he is now, is still continuing to produce music, and he hasn't directed in a while, but he's still out there. So hopefully I don't get sued for this brief unsolicited plug for John Carpenter. As usual, you can expect spoilers for the movies discussed, and as usual, you can probably expect some coarse language. My name's Larry Parsons. I'm your host and random Canadian. Please do seek us out on Facebook, seek us out on iTunes, and tell your friends about Rank and Review. We have a website, rankandreview.ca, and I would really love to hear from you at Rank and Review, RANKNREVIEW, at gmail.com. Enjoy the show. So Mr. Lee Beckman is back in my filthy garage. He returns, and once again we're doing kind of a special episode together. We're going to look at probably one of my preferred genre directors. And would you say Carpenter is your favorite director, period, or is it just...
If you had to put a gun to my head, I would probably say John Carpenter.
Yeah.
John Carpenter, when I first started taking movies seriously and as more than just entertainment, but as an art form, he was one of those first filmmakers to really sort of open the floodgates about technique and what it took to be a good filmmaker. So, yeah.
Well, I think that might be what's interesting about, one of the many things that's interesting about Carpenter is that he does make sort of popcorn entertainments, but he is a very proficient professional filmmaker. He makes them well. It's not a group of slapdash young folks who are trying to figure out how to make a film. This is a guy who knows how to make films, and he chooses to make movies like They Live and Memoirs of an Invisible Man, and etc. Like, he's very much a genre filmmaker. But you get the feeling like he had it in him to be an Oscar director if he wanted to, if he chose that path. What makes me love him is that he chose this path. He chose to stay in sort of almost specifically horror, sci-fi genre filmmaking.
There's an interesting quote by his first wife, Adrienne Barbeau. I'm pretty sure I said her name correctly. I hope I did. Anyways, that she said one of the things that she loved about her husband, that John was, one of the most, when she was married to him, one of the, apolitical. Like, he wanted to get out of any sort of politics with his movies, to be taken as a serious artiste, if you will, and just wanted to make genre pictures. So, and even if there's in interviews, he openly says, while selling some of his movies, it's basically Ice Cube kicking ass on Mars. He has no illusions that he's making, in some ways, these great works of art, if you will. And that's one of the things that I find very endearing about him.
He's making entertainment, and he's making to his own tastes, for the most part. But his tastes are shared by many. That said, he doesn't hit it out of the park 100% of the time. In fact, even in the 6 that we're talking about, I mean, there are some problematic numbers in here. But I think it's always worthwhile to check out the next John Carpenter movie.
Here's the question I have for you, though. Mm-hmm. Do you think he deserved to be mentioned in the same breath as other auteurs, filmmakers such as Alfred Hitchcock, Francis Ford Coppola, Brian De Palma, dare I even say the Beard, Spielberg?
Well, I mean, I don't think his influence could be understated. I mean, I think the modern equivalent we have, the closest thing, I'm not going to say he's there, but Robert Rodriguez is the guy who's sort of making those types of movies fairly consistently these days. And he's got more toys in his toy box than Carpenter usually has to play with. But his track record is, I think, even more spotty than Carpenter's.
I will say this, though. They sure have remade a lot of his movies.
Yeah, and that also suggests something about the influence.
Yeah.
You know? People who have seen the movies believe that they can sell them on a younger audience.
Yeah, and other filmmakers have aped Carpenter as well.
Absolutely.
Either like homage or flat out aped him. So,
and it's not that he has, you know, a bona fide classic in his resume.
he does.
He does. It's not just that, though.
Yeah.
He has, I think, several.
Mm.
I would say Halloween and The Thing,
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah.
100%
Yeah.
put it in the books.
Well, I mean,
Classic.
Halloween is in film. Is it the film library, film Congress, whatever you want to call
Library
it?
of Congress.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, it is sort of the industry standard horror slasher movie.
Yeah.
Like it is what they're all compared to.
Yeah.
I did slasher cinema history, and I put
Yeah.
Halloween at number 1.
Yeah.
It is the slasher movie as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
And I think it will keep that title for a long time.
Yeah. He also has a couple of cult classics, if you will.
Absolutely. I would say
We are reviewing one of them today.
Yeah. And we'll
Two of them, actually, too.
I would definitely say another one of these movies that we're going to talk today. I think I would put personally in the classic canon.
Yeah.
But it's hard to see it alongside names like Halloween and The Thing. But in its own way, I think one of these 6 movies that we're going to do is every bit the masterpiece. Should we mention the movies that we're going to talk about? He's got
We should.
He's got a very long
got-
and storied career,
Yeah.
so we're not going to do all of them. We're going to do 6.
Yeah.
So.
We're doing Baby Carpenter. We are. We have Carpenter's first movie ever.
Yeah, we're going to start with 1974's originally student feature, Dark Star.
Yep.
Co-written by Dan O'Bannon, and they were so happy with it as a student film that they added an extra 15 minutes and released it theatrically. And then his very first professional feature, which directly followed that, came out 1976, the year of my birth.
And mine.
And so this was his first, backed Hollywood quote-unquote picture. From there, we're going to jump ahead.
13, yeah.
From Assault on 13, we're going to jump ahead past the TV version of the Elvis Presley biopic.
Right.
And we're going to skip over, The Fog and Halloween, and we're going to jump to Escape from New York.
Mm-hmm.
Sort of the prototypical 80s post-apocalyptic thriller type of deal. I know it's not a genuine apocalypse that we've witnessed here, but it's got that vibe. The world has changed for the worse, and we have our heroes, our villains in this world.
Yeah. And then we're going to jump into, I do believe, is it his first studio picture?
Well, Starman, I think after The Thing failed miserably, he wanted to have a few hits under his belt because, he wanted to keep making movies. It's funny, Christine, the Stephen King movie that he did, we're not going to talk about it today, but that wasn't necessarily a passion project of his.
No,
he
he
really want to work with Stephen King that badly. It was like Stephen King was basically licensed to print money in the 80s, so if he can direct a Stephen King movie, then he's got a hit under his belt.
Yeah.
And I think that Starman, the movie that we are going to talk about, is a little bit in that category as well, is that it had money in it, and the concept was strong enough, and the people around it were strong enough. We'll get
to more of that when we get to Starman.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But I think that Starman, in a way, it's one of his bigger hits.
Yep.
But in a way, it's one of the more atypical Carpenter movies.
We'll talk about this later because I'll disagree with you on that.
We'll scrap on it.
Yeah.
But he followed it up with a much more, to my mind, typical John Carpenter beast. That being Big Trouble in Little China.
Amen to that.
And we're going to wrap it up going deep all the way to, was it 1989, I want to say?
Yes, it is.
1988, it's credited as on IMDb.
I thought it was 89, but They Live.
They Live, starring Roddy Piper, and he in need of a last name, Keith David.
Yeah, we'll get to Keith David. I have a new man crush.
So, again, it's sort of a grab bag of Carpenter that we're talking about here. And I think one of the more interesting things is for a podcast that seems quietly obsessed or not so quietly obsessed with horror movies.
Yep.
There's not really a genuine horror movie in the bunch here.
No. These are all either sci-fi, action,
they're genre movies,
Yeah.
but I don't think they're necessarily designed to keep you up at night.
No.
They're designed to keep you eating popcorn and having a smile on your face.
Yep.
And I say amen to that.
Alrighty. Hey, happy Friday the 13th, by the way.
And happy Friday the 13th to you. Shall we get started?
We shall.
It is the future. Mankind has conquered the stars. He moves out to the endless interstellar reaches of the universe. An advanced exploration corps, a new breed of pioneer, must seek out unstable planets and destroy them.
Drive sequence begun. Hit it, Pinback.
So as I've talked about in the past on the podcast, there was a period starting in the late 60s and going fairly deep into the 70s where it seems to me like any man could be a leading man.
Yep.
Mop hairs were no problem. Men could wear fur coats. There was no beard too bad, you know.
Yep.
There's a lot of people nowadays who will try to grow a beard and then sort of, shamefully with their tail between their legs crawl away from it. Not so in the 70s.
I'm looking at you, Orlando Bloom.
Not so in the 70s. Everybody looked like they were trying to be fucking dwarves from Lord of the Rings, it seemed.
Yeah.
So too, a young John Carpenter in his early 20s.
We're probably, I'm looking at 21, 22, 23.
He's going to film school and he hooks himself up with a young Dan O'Bannon. Dan O'Bannon's future is both bright and cloudy at the same time. He will have the proud credit of Alien as a screen credit, and he would go on to write and direct cult classic Return of the Living Dead.
Yeah, no, we have to thank him for that.
Yeah. He also got tied up with Jodorowsky's Dune. There was this big documentary released on it last year, and that he lost a year of his career to not making this Dune movie. He's an interesting conversation in and of himself. But going back to our focus of our conversation today, Carpenter shared writing credit on this fairly ambitious, no-budget science fiction movie with O'Bannon, but he directed it. This is his first feature-length baby. There's a few shorts to his credit on IMDb before this, but this is the first beast. And what you're looking at here is sort of a weird hybrid, drug-induced crossbreeding of A Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy and Waiting for Godot.
Yeah, no, well said, sir.
But way worse than either of those titles would suggest.
Yeah.
Now,
he also did some, you can tell there's some, Robert Heinlein and Ray Bradbury in there. The ending, actually, is very much from a Ray Bradbury short story, which name currently escapes me. But regardless, when you're sitting down to Dark Star, you have to kind of realize this is a student film. So you have to be kind of gentle with it. At points, it is sort of tedious. It's also billed as a comedy, which, I mean, I guess there are some funny elements to it.
This sort of speaks to me of the angry young man thing, and I totally rode this pony when I was in my 20s, too, where comedy was existential comedy, darkness was comedy, right? It was funny because we all share the same malaise and misery of existence. The Chekhovian idea of comedy, okay? It's I think something that appeals to young men before the weight of the world genuinely crushes their spirit.
Wow.
And I think that this is that too. I think you'll see the same sort of thing expressed in young playwrights who write these fuck heavy plays that are all angry about ugly sexual issues, or sort of doing something aggressive and negative. In a way, this is an aggressive and negative movie, but it's also really ambitious considering the money that they had put to this.
Definitely of its time, the special effects and the fact that these are students. This is a very ambitious project, so kudos for them for, making this.
Do you want to attempt the plot for us? I don't think we've really attempted it.
All right. Well, basically, it's a crew out in space whose job is to sort of almost clean up the universe, destroy planets by dropping these bombs.
I'm not sure if they're clearing a path for something else or if they're just getting rid of errant anomalies that are out in space, but they go to obscure corners of space and blow shit up. Basically. And they've been in space now for 2 decades. And they're starting to go crazy just from being around each other.
In fact, some of them have started to die off, actually.
So there's this whole study of isolation. Are they crazy? Is it not crazy? Are there enemy within, enemy without? That all sounds a lot more interesting than the movie actually is. But that's what they were going for. And again, considering that this was no budget and it's set on a spacecraft in outer space and it's made by students with no money. I applaud the ambition.
The pacing is very tedious and off. It's almost like there's kind of 3 little short stories that follow almost 3 different characters throughout this movie. We've got this one sort of subplot where one of the characters, played by Dan O'Bannon, has to go and, feed this pet that they've picked up on a planet, and it escapes and, begins this sort of slapstick chase through an elevator shaft.
Yeah, I often wondered if that actually happened, or if that was all existing in that character's head. That was one of my flights of fancy about the movie itself.
Yeah. There's also another story where these bombs that are, have their own intelligence.
Sentient, intelligent bombs. Again, that seems right out of like a Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, or more obviously like HAL from 2001.
Yeah. No, that idea is very, very interesting in its own self, but it's almost a different part of the movie and feels off from the rest of it. Yeah. I guess the third story, the people themselves and how mad they've been driven, or I don't know. Anyways, that's sort of the plot of Dark Star, in a nutshell.
It is a series of events, and again, in its defense, it was never really originally planned to be a feature-length movie seen by a lot of people.
Yeah.
We're basing our review now on the theatrical cut.
Yes.
So originally, I believe this was 66 minutes long.
Yes,
Something
and they
like that.
expanded
And
to
they
about
added like 15 minutes to get it to like,
shy of 80 minutes.
Yeah. So they could release it theatrically. And as interesting as it is, and as the fact that there's obvious talent involved in it, I don't know that it was worthy of a theatrical release. Maybe in 1974 it was, but certainly by today's standard. You know what this movie reminds me of, actually?
What?
Way back, in episode 19, I think it was, we reviewed The Roost.
Yes.
By Tyre West.
Yes.
Which, you can see it's competently made, considering the limitations of what they have.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good reference, yeah.
You can see the talent there, but you're hard pressed to give it a pass.
Well, that's the thing.
That's exactly
you have to remember that this is a student. They haven't. These are students that made this film. They haven't quite figured out film pacing. They're still working on film language. Carpenter, I don't think, and his next film that we're going to talk about also suffers from this. He hasn't really learned how to communicate well with the actors yet. The performances are very, in a lot of ways, stilted.
Nobody in this movie goes on to anything of significance as far as the cast that I can recall here. Obviously, Carpenter and Dan O'Bannon went on to brighter things, but no. This is handmade. Sometimes I find that sort of charming. And in a lot of, especially micro-budget films, I will put up with a weak performance because I understand that, you're making do. Try putting a movie together and asking people to commit and not pay them for that many hours, and then you're gonna sack them because you don't think they're pulling their weight.
Well, at least in the theatrical cut, they're aping Star Wars at one point, or is that just more for
Star Wars was brand spanking new. It was like it still had new car smell on it when this one's coming out, and the influence was undoubtedly there. I mean, sure that they were all they all
Anyways,
smoked some drugs, I'm going to presume.
And, you kind of get that impression.
And after they saw Star Wars, they all got together and they all started talking about what they'd been reading for school, and they cobbled up a short film. And it was supposed to be a short film. I think once you go about padding it out and stretching it out and trying to sort of make it into a feature length, you're not making these decisions for art anymore. You're saying, how do we get this to 80 minutes instead of how's the best way to tell the story? Yeah. And the story was pretty vague to begin with. It was like a bunch of crazy people get a little bit crazier. Yeah. Is basically the arc of the story.
I do like that they spend time delving into how crazy they've got purely cabin fever. Yeah. And I do like that angle about it, and that could be its own movie. Yeah. So that aspect I do enjoy about it. I do enjoy the whole idea about the bombs having their own identity and personality and whatnot. That's good. It just can't quite come together somehow.
It's a bunch of ideas that maybe or maybe not are connected with each other.
Yeah. Yeah.
And again, we'll just give it the benefit of the doubt. Like, from what I know about Dan O'Bannon, he was a bit of a wild child. Yeah. And I'm going to guess that Carpenter in his 20s was, probably, experimenting a little bit, and he could blow his own mind. How many screenplays has he written at this point, right?
I don't know.
Right?
Yeah.
So Everybody starts somewhere.
Yeah.
And, you know, if I made Dark Star when I was 22, I would be darn proud of it.
Darn
But I
tootin'.
don't know that I would try and push it out on a mass audience.
No. This is definitely for, you know, John Carpenter completists.
For sure.
And if there's any out there, Dan O'Bannon completists as
If
well.
you're into Dan O'Bannon, you're into John Carpenter for
Yeah.
sure. And if you are bonkers shit crazy for sci-fi,
Yeah.
if you'll watch anything with a spaceship in it,
Yeah.
fine. But
you can see,
yeah.
you can definitely see elements that Dan O'Bannon used in Aliens, though. Like there is kind of that model of this sort of working class crew out there that have probably spent too much time together out in the darkness of space. So
Yeah.
there's that as well. Anything else you can say about Dark Star?
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like I've been mean to it, but
Well, I mean, that's as we mentioned earlier. It's a student movie. You kind of have to. The fangs can't be that sharp.
yeah, the potential is there, and
Yeah.
we'll see where he goes from.
Freeze! This is the police. Drop your weapons and place your hands above your heads.
On Saturday, 6 members of the gang known as Street Thunder were ambushed by the police. On Sunday, the warlords of Street Thunder swore a blood oath to avenge their dead. For the gang called Street Thunder, it is a day of vengeance. It's war in the streets.
Oh, Jesus, come on. Come on, I'll give you my money. Just don't hurt me, please. Please.
It's terror in the night. It's the most shattering assault on a police station in history. Assault on Precinct 13.
This is a siege. It's a goddamn siege.
Okay, 1976. 2 years have followed since he made his brash debut with the flawed but interesting Dark Star. And now, all by his own self, John Carpenter is going to direct Assault on Precinct 13. Also written by... I think I see obvious influences here. I want to say this is sort of a Warriors sort of byproduct.
Well, what he did with it is, you know, Carpenter also has openly admitted that, you know, he loves westerns, and he's essentially taken Howard Hawks' Rio Bravo
Yeah.
and made it into this exploitation, gritty 70s crime picture.
But what I think is interesting to me about this movie, it is 1976, and it feels and looks like 1976.
Yeah.
So expect that.
Yeah.
But I see him sort of very early, either accidentally or on purpose, developing his idea of suspense and tone and atmosphere.
Yeah.
Because this is an action movie, essentially. It is, like you said, it's Rio Bravo. It's an urban Rio Bravo.
Yeah.
But I found it quite frightening. In fact, I think it edges on terrifying at times.
This movie has some terrifying and suspenseful moments. I don't want to get too early in talking about the sequence with the ice truck and the girl, but there are some general moments of terror. One of the things that really works about this movie is that we really don't know much about the gangs. I mean, I think the motivation for what they do is getting revenge for the murder that we see at the beginning of the picture.
Yeah.
But they're almost like zombies in a way.
They feel subhuman somehow, and they're so willing to die for this cause.
Yeah.
Basically, you have some key gang members get blown away after committing a horrible crime.
Yeah.
And the united gang front sort of decide that they're going to take revenge.
Yeah.
Coincidentally, an officer that we met, played by Austin Stoker, who I'm not really familiar with, who I think he's fairly strong in this.
He was sort of a 70s TV actor that was little big for a while. But beyond that, I don't know.
He's basically given what seems to be a quiet desk job at a sort of closing precinct.
Yeah.
That gets a little bit exciting at first because they end up having a prison transfer stop by and then become sieged, as we say, by these, whatever you want to call them. They go past gang, you're right. It's like some sort of crazy cult. And there are endless waves of them. And it really doesn't make a lot of sense. Honestly, if you want to sit down and break down the real world plot of this, I don't know what kind of dark future world that we would be in for this to really fly. But the movie is so suspenseful and it just keeps going and going that while you're in it, you don't have time to think about it or question it. You know? So you take the ride with the movie.
Yeah.
And not unexpected archetypes are exploited, and the noble police officer who's going to do the right thing no matter how dark things get is going to be forced to team up with the incarcerated, villain, and together fight side by side against this bigger evil.
Yeah.
Nothing new is brought to the board here,
No.
but it's just how it is presented to us. And I have to think, I don't know if I'm a real student of like 70 cinemas the way some people are, that the way the gunplay is handled and sort of the frighteningness of it seem different to me than your typical, action movie fare. The deaths had impact.
No, absolutely. I agree with that completely. I mean, I guess we can now talk about
the instigating crime.
Yeah, the one scene that really kind of, it sets the bar pretty high at that point. It's basically telling you that, anything and, almost something will happen.
Everything is on the table.
Yeah. We should probably, set the scene, though. In the first quarter of the movie, the gang decides to get revenge for the murders at the beginning, and they hunt and stalk basically this ice cream truck driver. This whole sequence leading up to the murder, and spoilers for those who haven't seen this.
Yes.
Honestly, if you don't know about this, you should stop now
Yeah.
and go and watch the movie, because it really is kind of but there's a murder in this movie which, even as you know it's coming or you've seen the movie, it's still brutal and shocking.
A little girl wants ice cream.
Yeah. And
she's brutally gunned down.
Yeah.
And her father doesn't directly witness it, but he is basically at ground zero for it.
Yeah.
He, sends his little girl to get an ice cream, and he turns around and she is dead.
Yeah.
And it's not one of those things where the gun goes off and we see a shape laying on the ground.
Yeah.
That bullet hits her square in the chest.
Yeah.
Doesn't it explode her ice cream? Or
pretty much over her face.
Yeah, and it's shocking. It is shocking. And in the behind the scenes, Carpenter talks about it. Is they figured when they screened this for the ratings board, there's no way they were going to let that fly.
Yeah.
And his producer thought of a clever way around it.
Yep.
He told the ratings board he was going to cut it.
And then didn't.
And then he didn't.
Yep.
Here. It's not that I have this bloodlust that I want to see little kids get gunned down, but I think the impact of that moment was A, important to the film, and B, I just don't like, censorship in movies.
No, it was a pretty bold move, and it was the right move.
Yeah.
But that whole sequence leading up to that particular moment is so well done.
Yeah.
It's almost Hitchcockian in how it's executed, where that truck, and there's almost no sound, there's no music, that car just keeps on going by, and the ice cream truck man knows there's something wrong.
Yeah.
And the tension builds and builds and builds, and the payoff is brutal.
Yeah. This is who we're dealing with. These are our villains.
Yeah.
Once we get into the precinct itself, the movie sort of gets locked into this one location, and I think that was very helpful for budgetary reasons.
Yeah.
But that's something that I would prepare people for. The scope of the movie kind of narrows into this sort of siege point.
Yeah.
And that's where you get
It's almost a play.
Yeah, you could almost be. You get to this sort of Night of the Living Dead almost sort of place.
Yeah.
Where all of the survivors, whether they want to or not, are forced to pick up arms and defend themselves.
Yeah.
Be them the secretary or be the a police officer, a man in a cage. And again, going to the deaths that are felt when a supporting character who has been terrified this whole time is given a gun and is finally able to defend herself. We sort of get that rush. Good for you, girl. But the stakes are high enough that just because she was precocious and had, mad skills didn't give her a life pass for the movie. If she's in the wrong place, she's going to take a bullet, and such is how it plays out for her,
Yeah.
And everybody's on the table. And that is made clear with the death of the little girl. Nobody is safe. If they're going to gun down this little kid, what the fuck else is going to happen?
Yep. No, one of the things I like about Assault, and Carpenter does this throughout his career, is he likes to use the same sort of actors. I'm going to give a special nod out to Frank Doubleday. and you go, Frank Doubleday, who is that, in fact?
Who is Frank Doubleday, Lee?
He was the actor that actually kills the girl.
Right.
He also shows up in Escape from New York, and he has this, I wouldn't say familiar face, but a face that you can't quite forget.
It's one of those faces.
Ghastly, nasty looking. He had a bit of a career as, of course, a character actor, just because of the way he looked. But he is pretty creepy both in this and Escape from New York. Yeah. He's quite good. There are two other actors that Carpenter also uses more than once that show up in Halloween. Charles Cyphers, do you remember him? He's the guy that brings out Napoleon.
Okay, right.
He's the sheriff that shows up in Halloween.
You feel like he'll be a bigger player than he is.
Yeah. Also, Nancy Keys, who's actually cast as Nancy Loomis.
Yes.
She's also in Halloween. She's the one that I think gets strangled in the car.
Right. And not just the cast members you'll see again, just sort of his typical thing. This is his screenplay, and he loves anti-heroes, right? So this Napoleon Wilson. This is sort of his first macho name. It's not quite Snake Plissken, Napoleon, but it's somewhat badass. Played by an actor named Darwin Jostin.
Yeah.
Very much in the wheelhouse of what I think Carpenter imagines himself to be. The guy badass, bucking the rules, doesn't give a fuck about anything, including what happens. He has
openly admitted that he hates authority and is very much suspicious of any organized group whatsoever. He definitely hates what is the establishment, and
absolutely,
and we get that here. We get that in other movies that we're going to talk about. That theme is very much there.
He's just sort of quietly disgusted with the entire artifice of authority around him, but he is willing to recognize in the Ethan character that he's one of the good ones, as it were.
Actor has to choke down some pretty bad lines.
It's true, but he sees that this, even though he's a cop and he's one of them, that he's staying and being noble and doing everything he can to keep people alive, and he recognizes that and does not exploit it. So. Carpenter always wants to have his cake and eat it too with his anti-heroes, because they're supposed to be completely badass and non-caring and yet utterly noble. So it's a tough balancing act, and that's why I think when it's played a little bit more goofy, it works more. Enter Kurt Russell. In this movie, the stakes of it are so high that those lines actually do ring a little bit hollow. In a way that they don't in future movies, when he's leaving a little bit more room for error in the proceedings, a little bit more lightness to this. This is like a survival horror movie as far as I'm concerned. You wouldn't find it on the horror shelf, but like I said, the stakes are frightening. And still today. It's dated. You can tell it's made in the 70s.
Oh, yeah.
But, they remade it and really didn't improve upon it particularly.
No, one thing that the remake got wrong was it tried to explain more about the gang characters, and they weren't as terrifying.
No, I think that the way Carpenter got it right is we didn't know enough about them, so we didn't question how they were able to pull this off. Whereas, they get a little more convoluted in the remake. But it's the remake is totally fine, but I think that, they didn't improve upon it, and therefore, didn't distinguish themselves as worthwhile in that respect.
One thing that made me chuckle about this movie is that the population of the gang members tends to all of a sudden...
Hundreds? Thousands? We don't know. But all of them are willing to die. They will run into gunfire.
That to me almost didn't make sense. But, it's a B-picture exploitation movie. So.
Well, that's what I keep saying. It doesn't make sense when you think about it now, but when you're watching the movie, you're just like, oh shit, shoot him, oh shit. It's also this fucking crazy arcade game, right? This is as close as you'll get to what was considered like hardcore, Asian influence action movies in the 90s. So much of the time in American cinema, you see someone pull a trigger and the guy grabs his chest and slowly slumps over to his knees and dies a quiet, relatively painless death. Not so here.
There's lots of squibs. There's lots of loud bangs.
We see what happens when people get hit, and we see the real visceral danger of bullets flying everywhere. It works very well. I think it is rock solid, and it's, as far as I'm going to say, his first professional feature.
Despite certain flaws, where once again, we have a very young John Carpenter, and he's still, I think, having difficulty, communicating certain things to the actors. Some of the performances are very stilted, and I think under a more experienced director, you could have gotten more
and
solid
some of the
performances.
dialogue lacks subtlety, and that's something that he is going to struggle with throughout his career.
Yeah, but a very talented filmmaker made this movie. You can tell the fruit is starting to ripen.
I know in the canon of Carpenter movies, this one doesn't get quite as much mention as like The Escape from New York's or The Thing and stuff like that. But I think right out of the gate, he came out swinging, and bravo.
I agree.
New York, 1997. The entire city is a walled maximum security prison. The bridges are mined. The rivers are patrolled. And the United States Police Force has everything under control, they think.
I'm going in.
John Carpenter's Escape from New York, the high adventure of the future.
So we're going to jump ahead to 1981. Halloween has happened. The fog has happened.
Yeah.
He did, some TV in the in-between times, but by this point, John Carpenter's name can sell a movie. What's John Carpenter got in his next? We're going to line up and see.
Yep.
The Fog was considered a little bit disappointing in its box office returns. But
it wasn't the huge hit that Halloween was.
No, but everybody agreed that if it's not an A+, it was, a B-, right? So here comes a fairly different animal, and this is sort of the weird halfway point, I think, between something like Halloween and Assault on Precinct 13.
Yeah.
It's not as scary and sort of harsh as Halloween or Assault on Precinct 13, but it's a sort of post-apocalyptic science fiction number that rides the line between funny action, macho-ness.
Yes.
I don't know what you call it. It's not necessarily a straight-out action movie, and it's not necessarily a straight-out comedy.
It's a sort of a cross between a social science fiction film and an action film. I mean, it is an action film at the heart of it.
New York is now a prison. It's walled in. There is a military presence on all the walls.
You're going to keep that, right?
Protecting people from getting in or out of the island.
Yes.
But unfortunately, the president, played by Donald Pleasance, who has a good working relationship with Carpenter at this point, crashes down in New York, and they need him back.
Yeah.
He's also got a very important suitcase.
Summit.
Yes, the MacGuffin of this particular movie.
Yeah.
Whether or not he gets the president, he wants that briefcase.
Yeah.
So through convoluted plot machinations, they decide they have to send the biggest badass in the world.
You mean Clint Eastwood?
No, I do not.
Who do you mean,
I mean the mullet himself.
Snake Plissken.
Kurt Russell is going to work again and again with John Carpenter.
Yeah, he's his go-to boy.
He's long said that he's not a person who typically believes in sequels, but he could see himself doing sequels to 2 movies that he ever made. One of them is Escape from New York.
Yeah.
And one of them we're going to talk about later. Big Trouble in Little China.
Yeah.
So obviously the two had a gas making this movie.
Yeah.
I'm glad. And this is definitely the high tent pole as far as the cult audience goes, is the cult around Carpenter.
Yeah.
This movie's pretty huge.
Yeah.
They did make a sequel to it in the early 90s. That'll be a discussion for another day. But as far as this one goes, Escape from New York, early 80s. How's it aging? Is it still a fun popcorn movie?
I've seen this film, I think, at least 4 or 5 times now. And one of the things that sort of struck me as I watched it, and I watched it on Christmas Day, believe it or not.
Nice.
This is a really dark movie. You talked about there being a sort of action comedy. There's some pretty dark, serious, sinister things going on here. And the movie is bathed in darkness in a lot of ways. You've got people getting raped, people being dragged onto the floors. The gang that essentially runs New York, once again, are almost like zombies, very much Assault on Precinct 13.
That's where I get the Precinct 13 sort of connection.
Yeah.
When they start crawling
This
out of the
movie's
sewers just to fuck with whoever's there.
Yeah,
you
this
know?
movie's kind of a nasty bit of business. And there's cannibals, if I'm not mistaken, right?
And yeah, well, I mean, there's a struggle for resources on the island, just generally speaking.
Yeah.
I would agree with you if not for Snake Plissken.
Yeah.
Because he's always about saying things like, give me a smoke. And he is sort of this type of anti-hero that I have a problem with, to be honest.
Alrighty.
You see it in the Riddick movies.
Mm-hmm.
You see it in the Blade movies. You see it in this movie.
Yeah.
The central figure of the movie seems to know he's in a movie. He knows that everything's going to be okay. He knows that this is all artifice.
Yeah.
And he's not afraid. And because Snake Plissken is never afraid, I am never afraid. Because Riddick is not scared of the evil monsters that are swarming around him, I can't be afraid of them. And because, you know, when he does a grisly kill, he doesn't, you know, turn his head and vomit or go, oh my god, that just happened. He has to give like a punchy, really obvious one-liner.
Yeah.
Straight out of fucking Airplane type of obvious, right? No, I think that takes away from the seriousness of the proceedings. And I'm going to give Carpenter the benefit of the doubt that it was not accidental.
Yes. I mean, in a lot of ways, there's the good, the bad, and the ugly going on here. It's no surprise that Lee Van Cleef is in this movie. In a lot of ways, you know, Snake is the man with no name. It's not even subtle.
Right.
I would probably even say that Brain, played by the great Harry Dean Stanton, you know, is the Eli Wallach character from that movie, and you know, the pot of gold is the president and what he has, and the Duke is probably the evil sheriff from that film. So yeah, I mean there is a sort of not quite serious elements to it, but at the same time, I guess I was just sort of surprised by the nasty bit of business that this movie was. It was not as fun as I remembered.
Yeah. I don't know. I think that I smile and smirk throughout the movie.
Yeah.
And maybe I shouldn't. Maybe that's a miss. But I do.
Yeah.
I think that, and especially when you look at the sequel.
Well, the sequel's, yeah.
It's flat out. They go completely to the other side. It's sort of like full-on comedy. It's almost the Evil Dead 2 to this movie's Evil Dead.
Yeah.
Right? But Snake is always the unreal thing in the otherwise they're striving to make fairly real sci-fi environment.
Yeah.
And for me that kind of works against the movie.
Yeah.
Is it fun to see Snake deal with all this and see his like, you know, cunty one-liners that he likes to throw in everybody's face?
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
But there's no reality to it. This is one of Carpenter's kind of dumb, fun action movies.
Yeah.
But it's disguised as this nihilistic, post-apocalyptic sort of
dystopian,
nightmare.
yeah.
Right. And I don't know. It's strange and it's original, and I'll give it points for that.
Yeah.
But for me, the tone is off. But I can see its influence.
I think special props has to go out to the set designer Joe Alves. Do you know who Joe Alves is?
And the set designer for.
Well, no, but what was he famous for?
Go.
He actually made the shark in Bruce in Jaws. That's one of his many claims to fame.
Right.
The set design to this movie is top notch. Hollywood keeps on threatening to remake this movie. And to those listening, if you are listening to this, one thing you're going to have to get right if you redo this movie is the background and the setting is unbelievable. Aesthetically, this movie is kind of a joy to watch. Mm-hmm. The set, of the Statue of Liberty, the buildings, the famous bridge. Apparently, they were looking for a place, and they didn't want to use a studio, so they used old St. Louis. There was a section of the city that had been burnt down recently, and they shot in along there. That was probably one of the best ideas they could have done for this movie. It's props to Joe Alves and his crew for doing this. It's pretty cool, and it's very ambitious in its scope.
To the positive spectrum that I will also say, for a movie made in 1981, it doesn't feel very 1981. The only thing that really screams 81 is the mullet, really.
Yeah.
This is another one of the loud, proud John Carpenter scores that we're seeing here.
Yeah.
He scores a lot of his own movies, not all of them, but a lot of them.
Yeah, it's one of his characteristics.
And it's synthy in a way that a lot of the 80s movies are synthy, but it's more recognizable as Carpenter world than it is of 80s.
Yeah.
This is a really helpful thing when you see period films or science fiction films. They can tend to age better than others because they're not stymied by hair gel or glitter, you know. So that I like. I like that all these years later, I could watch it, you know, when my boys are old enough to watch it, and they won't be like, this is dumb.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah. Another thing that really works for the movie is the supporting cast. We have a pretty impressive cast definitely for a movie of this kind of ilk. We've got
Adrian Barbeau, Ernest Borgnine,
Harry Dean Stanton, Isaac
Shaft,
Hayes,
Isaac
the
Hayes.
man himself.
I always just call him Shaft because I'm white.
Yeah. Also, the great Frank Doubleday returns again as one of the lead gang members.
Right.
Once again, Hollywood, if you're going to redo this movie, you have to have it well cast.
Yeah.
They
but
do.
It does still fill that archetype, like I say, especially in these sort of dark future movies, right?
Yeah.
Anytime you meet somebody who's friendly or nice or a safe haven,
yeah,
expect them to die, right? Anytime somebody makes the noble choice, they're gonna die, they're gonna pay for it with their lives. Yeah. I saw this very young. I remember as a little kid being quite upset by Ernest Borgnine being killed.
Yeah.
And then when Adrian Barbeau got smacked by the car, it just took me right off my food. I was just like, that sucks. More people needed to live through this movie. Watching it now, I did not have that, you know, it just sort of seemed like inevitably it was going to get worn down to where Snake diehards his way out of the situation and everybody else is there to help him survive, right? And Snake, like I say, seems to have that knowledge.
Yeah.
Question.
Well, yes.
Do you think that Christian Bale is a big fan of these movies? Do you think that might have served his delivery of the Batman performance?
Because there's totally a little Snake Plissken in his Batman.
Quite possibly. Anyways.
Just a theory. Just putting it out there.
to be discussed later. No, anyway. So, any final thoughts on Escape from New York?
I have to say, I'm a big fan of the ending of the movie.
Yeah, Carpenter's distrust of any, the establishment is very much alive and well in this movie. Yeah, it works.
He says he's going to give the tape back, and then he doesn't, and he destroys it casually.
The piece of cord is destroyed.
Yeah, as he strolls off into the darkness. Cue up the score. Cue up the cigarette.
Yeah.
Macho badassery wins the day.
Final thoughts?
Final thoughts is overall, I think that it's solid, but nowhere near among my favorite Carpenter films. And I understand the cult audience around it. I'm just not one of the flag wavers.
The idea, I think, is the big selling point of this movie. I like the idea that New York has become a prison, and this is 1980s New York.
Yeah.
Before Mayor Giuliani came in and made it a police state, he cleaned up, sort of, New York. I like that about it. Once again, pacing is a bit of an issue.
In movies like this, I like the fuck you, badass, stick it to the man type of character. Yeah. In real life, I find them really irritating,
I'm detecting you're not liking the Snake.
But, the Snake as a character in a movie, for sure. But that kind of attitude, that sort of... It's an arrogant perspective. Whether he's right or not, it's an arrogant perspective that everybody in the world's got their head up their ass except me. And that is basically his defining characteristic.
In 1977, Voyager 2 was launched into space to the outermost regions of the universe. It carried an invitation in all languages for alien life forms to visit our planet. Someone, somewhere, listened and accepted our invitation. Get ready. Someone is coming. Someone like no one she has ever known before.
Can you clone a living organism from the hair of a dead man?
We're hypothesizing a technology that's probably 100,000 years ahead of us.
He has powers we cannot imagine, and the face and touch of the man she loved.
Greetings. What's the matter with you?
So we're going to jump ahead a few years now.
Yep.
The thing I think his real, true high watermark masterpiece bombed because it was competing with the friendliest alien in the world.
And he was gutted. He was totally gutted. The thing was like his passion project. And for it to fail as much as it did.
But it failed only to be rewarded with time.
Yeah.
The thing has made its money back. I have to believe the fact that it's a highly saleable object to this day.
Yeah.
He is vindicated on that.
Yeah.
But like I said, he made Christine to make a buck, and here comes his next studio sort of lock picture. You know.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways, I feel like the concept of this alone was sort of built for a summer tentpole release.
Yeah.
It didn't have to be John Carpenter that they chose to direct this movie.
Yeah.
But I thought it was a good choice on the part of the suits on this part.
Yeah.
You know, it's not necessarily completely obvious. He's a genre filmmaker, but is not typically comfortable in the PG realm, which this movie very much is.
Yeah.
I would argue that this is probably the most quote-unquote Disney movie that Carpenter has ever made.
Yeah.
And so that tonally makes it distinct and different from the rest of the movies.
It's definitely the oddest movie of his whole filmography. One thing about it that screams un-Carpenter-like, and he's come out and said this as well, is that he thinks aliens should always be the enemy. They should not be friendly in any way, shape, or possible. But that is not the case with this movie. This alien is basically needs to be rescued and helps does the rescuing as well at one point. It's a very nice, good alien, and we the humans, we are the true villains.
But I think what makes it in the Disney sort of sphere of things is that the alien is not just nice. It's got this almost sort of childlike innocence and wonder, and is learning about the world, and is learning about love, and learning about
humanity else. And the human condition. Yeah.
And the fact that plot points, just to push the plot a little bit, when it lands down on the planet in a sequence that's sort of weirdly reminiscent of the ship from The Thing crash landing into Earth at the very beginning of that movie, or the Spheres thing. He sees a picture of a man on a shelf, and chooses to take that form, for the duration of his stay, presumably to keep a low profile.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, the person that he chose is actually a dead man, and the Karen Allen, who is the grieving widow, wakes up from a bad hangover and grieving, to find her husband's back in the form of a young, naked Jeff Bridges.
The dude rocks the butt in this movie.
It's true. Jeff Bridges will always be the Big Lebowski. Or, well, I guess he's not the Big Lebowski. He is the Lebowski of the Big
Jeffrey Lebowski.
Jeffrey Lebowski. And so I think of him as sort of this sort of larger, softer, older dude. And it's weird seeing a buff, naked dude walking around the house.
Jeff Bridges was a hottie, man, in his 30s, mid 80s. He was a A-lister, good-looking golden boy. Oh, thank goodness he could act.
He was nominated for an Academy Award.
He was.
For this movie, and I question that. I'm not questioning Jeff Bridges' ability as an actor, but I think that the character is very charming in that it's learning about everything, and that he's sort of got this aw shucks smile on his face.
It's an imaginative. It's an imaginative performance. I agree with you. I kind of do a bit of a double take. I sort of get the impression that the nomination was more thank you for your body of work and we'll, truly thank you at some point.
Yeah.
It is an odd nomination. I will say this, though. How good is Karen Allen in this movie?
She's awesome.
She is the anchor in this movie.
She is who should have gotten an Oscar nomination.
Abso-freaking-king. Yeah, right. She's so good in this movie, and she sells a ridiculous plot if you sit and you think about it. The fact that this character, probably suffering from severe emotional trauma, somehow, and spoilers, falls in love with an alien and proceeds to have sex with it. Like, sitting through this movie at this point, at one point I kind of went, this movie is really ridiculous. But I am totally suckered in by it.
Yeah, well, this is John Carpenter's only genuine date movie.
It's a road romance picture. It is.
And does that marriage sit completely well for me? Well, I'm typically expecting him to waste little girls buying ice cream. So no, it's kind of like a little bit not what I expected.
Yeah.
I remember liking this a lot more when I was a kid. I don't dislike the movie. I think it's fine.
Yeah.
I think that, this was him again, hoping that he'll be able to make another picture.
Yeah.
And now having made 2 successful movies in a row,
yeah,
the next movie could be whatever he wants.
Yeah.
So bravo to that.
Yeah.
It was a win for him either way. I don't think he sold his soul to the Hollywood system or anything
No,
like that.
not at all.
The other thing that I think that the movie has to its benefit is the always, I think, likable Charles Martin Smith.
I'm glad you mentioned our Canadian boy. Here's a guy that does not get enough love. I mean, this is a guy that actually still makes movie in Hollywood.
Yeah.
He just did a Dolphin movie with Morgan Freeman not too long ago.
He's one of those faces, too. Anybody who has seen The Untouchables, remember, oh, right, Charles Martin Smith. He breaks my heart in that movie. I love that guy.
Never Cry Wolf.
Never Cry Wolf. My grandpa took me to see that movie in the theaters. I remember him eating mice on the big screen. So I have a soft spot for Charles Martin Smith. Spoiler. But he's got a really good role in this. And
he does.
He's the character in a way that is, peripheral to our romance, the most interesting. Because he's genuinely interested in the intelligent life in outer space.
Yeah.
And the day he's been waiting for his entire life has come.
Yeah.
It's sort of like, so this guy has waited and waited and waited to know that there's life in space. And he gets that confirmation. And that arc, for me, works as much or more than the love story.
There's a lot of things that work for this movie for me. Once again, I just want to get back to Karen Allen for a second because, she's a hottie, but at the same time, totally anchors this movie, and her arc is far more interesting than the aliens itself. Mm-hmm. I guess I was sort of drawn in by her performance because when we meet her, she's really at her low, and suffering a lot, and manages to go on this big arc of healing throughout the whole thing.
Well, that's another psychological question to be asked.
Yeah.
Does she fall in love with this alien, or is this alien her opportunity to say goodbye to her husband and for real let go? By letting, Starman board the ship and fly off into space, is she also letting go of the fact that her husband's died and she can now start living her life again? You know what, Lee? I think that is the case, Oh, shucks.
Yeah.
But this is pretty far afield of the ending we just discussed in Escape from New York.
Yeah, it's I guess the happiest ending out of probably the majority of Carpenter films.
Yeah.
I mean, she, is pregnant at this point. Once again, with another sort of ridiculous element of this movie. This movie was a hit. It was a hit.
It was monster. Oh yeah, this was big. I remember when I was a kid. This was
spawned a TV series even with Robert Hayes of, wait for it, the Airplane movies.
I prefer to think of him as the guy from Cat's Eye.
Oh right.
Yeah, it's completely fine. It's completely adequate. But I think it's atypical Carpenter. I think it's one of those things that people who are aware of Carpenter, you can say, he did Starman. Like, really? Carpenter did Starman?
Oh yeah, I know. Yeah.
And not like, really? But like, really? He did Starman? Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. And it is interesting. And again, the reality with which he handles the situation helps sell the story that, as we say, is both familiar, somewhat saccharine, and, just something that is, they have not reinvented the wheel.
Yeah.
But it's told efficiently,
Yeah.
And for the big budget Hollywood standards at the time, it looks good.
Yeah.
It's still watchable today. It's very 80s.
Yep. Special shout out goes to George Buck Flower, another Carpenter regular who's used continuously throughout his movies. He's the cook that drives Starman basically close to the crater. Also, we have a young MC Gainey as the cop that actually shoots Karen Allen as well. For those who don't know, he was in Lost. He's actually got quite his own film. Yeah. So it was neat to see that this time around. Yeah, I like Starman. It is a very sweet, saccharine film. It's a studio picture, and you could tell that he did it, for the suits, for the money, to help his career, and that I'm fine with that.
Yeah. I mean, in a way, it was either that or, personally direct one of the Halloween sequels, right?
Yeah. And
I'm kind of, glad he didn't slum it necessarily with that. I guess he wrote Halloween 2, but...
he did.
Whatever.
Yeah.
I get it. I don't know. We've kind of been short service on Starman, but I don't know what more to say about it. I mean, if this sounds like a movie that will appeal to you, it probably will.
No, I mean, once again, for the whole Carpenter filmography, I definitely should go see it. It's a good movie. It's it's a date movie in a lot of ways. It's the only real Carpenter romance movie in his whole oeuvre.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, it's interesting. Young performance from Jeff Bridges. Like I say, Karen Allen's probably obviously most famous for playing Marion in Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Can we say it? The greatest action film of all time.
Raiders of the Lost Ark.
She's had an amazing career. I'm surprised she didn't make it as more movies than she did. But if you look at her
up, she's been in lots of stuff.
Scrooged. She's been in Animal House. She was in that ghastly William Friedkin movie, Cruisin'. Yeah. And then she just disappeared. I'm told, just from reading through interviews and whatnot, that she gave up her career to be a mom and raise kids as well, and came back for that last Indiana Jones movie. The world needs more Karen Allen movies.
Yeah. And like I said, again, no disrespect to Jeff Bridges, and I'm sure this was like a big movie in his career and everything like that. I'm not saying that he's a bad actor and that shame on him for getting this nomination. Yeah. But I think it's easy to play the aw shucks alien who has whatever power is needed for the next scene.
Yeah.
You mentioned Karen Allen being shot and he's able to fix her because, it's just that kind of movie. Right? It's worth looking into if you're a Carpenter completist or if you like, sort of a more Disney-friendly science fiction movie.
Yeah.
In a way, this is sort of his way of saying, okay, audience of the 80s, you didn't want The Thing, you wanted E.T., so
here we go.
Here's E.T.
Yeah. This is Jack Burton in the Pork Chop Express, and I'm talking to whoever's listening out there. It's a pretty amazing planet we live on here, and a man would have to be some kind of fool to think we're all alone in this universe.
There is a hidden world where ancient evil weaves a modern mystery.
What's going on here? Is this some kind of...
magic. The darkest magic.
They call it Little China.
Finally, we shall bring order out of chaos.
It's where Big Trouble was waiting for Jack Burton.
Who? Jack Burton. Me.
Jack.
Jack?
They told him to go to hell.
So I was talking earlier about how I think that he has not just one, but two, but a few bona fide classics in his oeuvre, Mr. Carpenter. Halloween, absolutely no one is going to argue. The Thing, people argued maybe when it came out, but I don't think you'll find a person that would argue today. In fact, I think it's more significant than Halloween.
My favorite horror movie of all time.
There you go. There you go.
But we're not here to talk about The Thing.
But I think that this next movie we're going to talk about, which is called Big Trouble in Little China, as far as I'm concerned, is a capital C classic John Carpenter movie.
I would love to have been a fly in the wall when the producers or whoever was in charge of starting this movie do the pitch meeting for it.
Well, this is what I say. This is why I love me some Carpenter, right? The Thing bombed. It didn't make its money back.
No, yeah.
But then he made Christine for a little bit of money, and it made a ton.
Yeah.
And then he made Starman, studio picture. It made a shit ton of money. So you know what, John? Do whatever you want. Well, we saw The Thing. We know you're talented. You've made money for us the last two projects. What do you got for us, John? Well, I got this script called Big Trouble.
Well, see, I'm going to stop you right there because here's the thing. He was brought on late to this project.
Oh, really? That's interesting.
The original director bowed out, and they were scrambling because the production was going to go ahead. Mm-hmm. And Kurt Russell kind of said, hey, I've got this guy that can probably do this movie, and actually brought in John himself. So this is not his idea. This was actually scripted by the great W.D. Richter, who W.D. Richter was actually a former Navy SEAL. And then decided to take his hand in screenwriting and came up with. How would you describe this movie? It is a action comedy supernatural thriller with kung fu in it.
Really, I got this weird feeling like, you know how everyone says Tarantino is kind of like a remix artist?
Yeah.
He takes all of these sort of disparate elements from grungy 70s movies and sort of puts them in a blender and remixes them into his own thing.
Yeah,
that's sort of the same idea, but we're looking at a weird combination of real and made up sort of Asian. I don't know.
These are the sort of films that were sort of coming out of China in a lot of ways.
Supernatural sort of religious stories. Of creatures in the deep and wizards and black magic and white magic. And also just Asian gangs and disputes and territories. and this anti-hero badass mullet-wearing trucker.
Redneck trucker. Wait for it, whose name is Jack Burton.
Jack Burton.
Burton and the Pork Chop Express.
And this is Snake Plissken making fun of Snake Plissken.
Yeah.
This is like the next level self-aware Snake Plissken. So I was sort of complaining that Snake Plissken kind of knew that this was all bullshit and that he was going to come out of it fine.
Yeah.
Jack Burton knows it and comments on it. His whole character is a comment on this type of hero, which is hilarious because it's just this type of hero that Carpenter loves, right?
Yeah.
So in this movie, we're going to ape that.
Yeah. One of the brilliant masterstrokes that this movie has is that our lead protagonist is a complete and utter idiot.
He's
with the exception
fairly useless.
Yeah.
Until the climax of the movie,
when he does defeat, I'll give his character credit. He does defeat our villain.
Was it Liu Kang?
It's Lo Pan.
Lo Pan. Thank you. He does destroy the big bad at the end of the movie. He is given that.
Yeah.
But for the most part, he talks like he's all that.
Yeah.
And he fails consistently.
Yeah. And we love him for it.
It's hilarious.
It's too bad that this movie was a huge flop when it came out. Because I would be totally down for a lot more of Jack Burton.
This world, yeah.
Legend has it. I mean, this film, when it was first released, you know, a lot of these movies, they get preview screenings, so the studio can kind of know what kind of movie, whether they have a hit or a flop on their hands. This film scored the highest rating ever on its preview audience. Fox was very excited about this movie coming out. They thought they had a major hit on their hands, and then it was a tentpole picture.
Yeah.
They released it in mid-July, and it came out, and then there were crickets.
Yeah.
And it's sort of sad because this movie is basically 100 minutes of pure joy. This movie makes me smile from ear to ear every single minute.
It's bizarre because this was the age of the late 80s blockbuster where
Yeah.
things were getting fucking weird.
Yeah.
Movies like The Golden Child and Howard the Duck were gracing the screens.
Yeah.
And like just really hella strange.
Yeah.
Big budget movies that you just think, how did that get greenlit? I'm kind of glad it did get greenlit, but how did that happen?
Yeah.
This is in that bunch, but unlike the other ones I mentioned, I think this one's fantastic. Right?
Yeah.
I think it's funny when it wants to be, and it's got good action when it wants good action.
Yeah.
Is it scary? Well, I don't know that I'll go all the way to say scary, but it is unabashedly supernatural. A giant monster jumps out of a hole in the wall and eats a guy whole. You know? There's a floating eye watcher demon. That whatever it sees, Lo Pan sees.
Yeah.
You know, we're slowly ushered into this supernatural world.
Yeah.
We start off with sort of the macho, I am testosterone Jack Burton.
Yeah.
Wanting to collect a debt from a drinking buddy.
Yeah.
And he goes to help pick up this guy's fiancée from the airport where she is kidnapped by this Asian gang. And then Jack's truck ends up getting stolen. And in order to basically get his money that is owed to him, he is dragged kicking and screaming into this adventure that happens in this underground of
like a Saturday morning serial movies. I'm sure.
And it gets more ridiculous with each scene and more cartoonish with each scene.
And yet it works. It totally works. And like as I mentioned, you kind of grin from ear to ear. It has this energy to it that is just gleeful and joyful and full of life.
Can I say this?
Yeah.
High watermark for Kim Cattrall.
Yeah.
I know everyone will
Once
say
again,
Sex
the Great
and the City,
Canadian.
blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
But in a way, this is high praise. And anytime I compare a character or anything to the Coen brothers, Gracie Law, this character that she plays, this journalist who's got a lot of moxie and won't be told what to do, but can't help herself but fall in love with Jack Burton for some fucking reason. But her dialogue is sort of delivered in the same way like the Jennifer Jason Leigh approaches her dialogue in the Hudsucker Proxy. As this sort of like, I'm one of the boys. You know, like it's got this weirdly throwback quality to it.
His Gil Friday almost kind of banter in dialogue.
And she comes walking in from a completely different movie, right?
Yeah.
But fits like a snugly into this movie, right? All of these disparate pieces should not fit together.
And yet it does. Like this movie is everything in the kitchen sink, all thrown at you. Like it wants to please you so badly. And just, you just got to let the joy just kind of seep over it. Special props to Dennis Dunn, who is truly the lead of this movie.
He's the hero.
Yeah.
He's the hero of the movie.
Yeah.
Jack Burton gets all of the praise.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and he has to work for it, but he's really, really good in this. Very capable action hero, very charismatic. And also Victor Wong, who's also used in more than one Carpenter movie. He's also
he will
quite
work
good.
with these guys both directly again. His follow-up feature was
Prince of Darkness.
So you will see both of those gentlemen in. So,
yeah.
I'm just completely enthusiastic.
Yeah, no, there's only a certain amount of movies that I see annually. Both The Thing and Big Trouble I manage to see every single year, and can probably quote my fair share of this movie. I gotta say, I love the line, "Son of a bitch must pay." You say that, and immediately, a true film will go, will totally nod his head and get it. Big Trouble in Little China is one of those movies where you go to people's houses, and if you're like me, you'll look at their DVD collection, and 9 times out of 10, you will at least see Big Trouble in Little China there.
Yeah.
This film has an audience. It has a very growing audience. There's a reason why this film is the ultimate cult classic.
And like Jack Burton to me is just such a better hero figure than Snake Plissken. I know we've already talked about how the fact that they just beat the shit out of this anti-hero archetype.
Yeah.
But one of my favorite things is when he rescues one of the brides from Lopan, Kim Cattrall. She gives him a big smack in the face as gratitude.
Yeah.
And he gets a smear of lipstick on his face.
Yeah.
And as he's confronting these badasses and he's laying down the law, talking about how he's gonna fucking beat them so bad they'll have to be identified by blood relatives. He's got this fucking lipstick smear on his face and everybody's just looking at him like, what the fuck? Brilliant.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
Yeah, no, I agree. Whoever came up with that scene, bravo.
Yeah. And I almost wonder if it was an afterthought. I mean, I guess they had to let him do something, but yes. He brags a lot about his reflexes, and at a crucial point in the movie, he catches a blade and throws it back and kills a dude, and it saves the day. One thing. One thing.
I love the sequence with the wheelchair where you're trying to
falling
escape.
backwards down there.
Yeah, no.
One of the most bizarre deaths in screen history.
Yeah, I guess we do have to kind of talk about that. You have to sit and kind of wonder what came to that idea. All right, so what I want from you is you're going to sort of blow up real big and turn into this almost giant balloon and explode what? Yeah. What is it? What would you even call it?
He exploded. He expanded until he exploded.
He sees the death of his master and gets so angry, he turns into a steroid-using Cabbage Patch doll.
And explodes green lettuce everywhere. These 3 personal bodyguards of Lopan. I remember when I was a kid, I thought they were straight out of the Mortal Kombat.
So did I. I kind of thought, oh, okay, so this is where Mortal Kombat came from.
Yeah, but apparently not. But anyway, they're sort of the 3 lead henchmen, and they're like these unbeatable supernatural super ninjas, right? Yeah. And once he doesn't deal with failure well. Yes, once he sees that his master has been felled, he's going to kill himself. But instead of, the harikari or anything like that, yes, he expands like this great big jelly belly and then explodes. It's this hugely cartoon moment out of this other
Every single time those 3 show up in the movie, I'm sort of waiting for her fight to start to play. Yeah.
I can't overstate how goofy this is.
Yeah.
And how strange and how all over the place.
Yeah.
But the comedy works when they want it to, and the action works when they want it to.
The action is awesome.
There's a lot of balls in the air.
And it works. I don't know how it works.
For all the stupidity, there's some smart satire going on here.
Yeah.
Like, spoilers for the Rank and Review.
Yeah.
But number 1 on the list, with a motherfucking bullet, is Big Trouble in Little China for me. No. But that's where I land. That's where I'm biased. This is a movie of my youth. When I first saw it, I think I was 12 or 13.
Yeah.
So that may help it for me. Maybe nowadays for the kids, of that age group, they have a different Big Trouble in Little China. But damn, I love me this movie. I love me this movie for maybe more than it's worth. but I love me this movie.
Yeah, John Carpenter does give good cinematic head, and this is definitely one of those sort of explodes and just all over your face good. Sorry, that's a pretty rough analogy.
They got a little graphic there.
But yeah, no, this movie is just pure joy through and through. It's kind of funny, like I said, like he was sort of brought in late to this project, and it's still very much a John Carpenter film. It has his fingerprints and style all over it.
Yeah.
I'm still amazed that like this movie is all over the map, and yet it still works.
Yeah.
It still works, and it's like lightning in a bottle.
Yeah.
There's no reason this movie should be as good as it is.
It is a genuine cultural artifact. It's it's got its own little niche on the playground.
Yeah.
And unlike Escape from New York, it is not sullied by a lame sequel.
Yeah. I will say this: anyone out there, if you can make a sequel to Tron, then you can make a sequel to Big Trouble in Little China.
I'm still
holding
else
out.
out there, please don't make a sequel to Big Trouble in Little China. How they could only fail. They could only fail at this point. Do you want to see an old, beleaguered, Jack Burton who needs a cane to step down from his big wheel? I don't know. I think that
I would pay money to see.
Not every movie needs a sequel.
Fair enough.
But that's me.
Our masters!
What do these things want, and why are they here?
You still don't get it, do you, boy? They have recruited the rich and the powerful. They're running the whole show. Wake up! They're all about you, all around you. Blinded us to the truth.
Take a look. They are safe as long as they are not discovered.
I don't know what they are or where they came from, but we gotta stop them.
Stay away from me.
Put these on.
They have us. Look at them. They're everywhere. Our owners.
We have no other choice.
I don't like this one bit.
Leave it alone, man. It ain't none of my business. Ain't none of yours.
We have been lulled into a trance.
Listen to what I'm saying to you. We're in trouble. The whole world's in trouble.
Okay, so we're going to wrap up our little study on John Carpenter with the 1988 film They Live. This is a movie that has grown in my esteem. I think that when you get to the very late 80s and early 90s, we get into a little bit of a somewhat problematic era in Carpenter films. I think there's a little bit of a dip here. There's a noticeable positive blip with In the Mouth of Madness, but it gets a little rocky. But I don't know. I used to include this in that group, and I don't know if I do anymore. I'm still not foaming at the mouth over it, but I will say this. It's smarter than I gave it credit for.
Most people don't realize this, but this is a very, very angry movie. This movie has definitely a political agenda going on it. And it was probably missed by... I missed it as a kid.
Yeah.
On the surface, it is a rather silly Invasions of the Body Snatchers type sci-fi action motion picture. But underneath it, at least allegorically speaking, this movie is a giant attack on Western capitalism, more especially sort of Reaganomics. During many interviews that Carpenter's given about this movie, he's even said that this is his sort of nightmarish response to what he calls, the scariest time in American history, the Reagan years. And it's all over this movie.
It's like somebody has woken up from a dream world almost, right?
Yeah.
The world you see is the world you see, and it kind of sucks.
Yeah.
But you're struggling to get by, and you're fighting the same fight as the guy next to you.
Yeah. Until
you find these magical sunglasses.
Yeah.
And you put these magical sunglasses on, and you realize that all of the billboards say,
reproduce
or believe.
This is your God.
Yeah. It's feeding you all of these horrible messages. And that's horrifying in of itself. But then you start realizing that a lot of the people that you're standing next to and that you're shoulder to shoulder with are not people.
Yeah.
They're aliens.
Yeah.
And I think that's sort of the way he sees the man. Corporate America, the entity, they have no humanity to them at all.
Yeah.
We are their slaves. We are the people that are working the crops. And we live pointless lives beneath their feet.
Yeah.
Essentially. And this drifter, badass, anti-hero character that Carpenter likes to bring us so much.
What is the name of
Nada.
James Nada, but of course, almost like the Neo character.
Yeah. And he's like a dude, rough and tumble guy, and works construction and just is making a hard living with his hands. And he gets awoken to this conspiracy by complete accident, and decides he needs to do something about it. And how does one man bring down this huge infrastructure, alien infrastructure of control? And the answer that the movie posits is, well, he doesn't. I think. I think. But we'll talk to the ending when we get there. That said, for the darkness that we both described, the movie also has that Snake Plissken thing, where the main character seems to believe he's going to get through this thing, right? It's just, I'm here to kick ass and chew bubblegum.
And it has the immortal line.
And I am all out of bubblegum.
Yeah.
That's funny, sure. Yeah. That's a great badass macho line. But does it belong in this smart science fiction movie, or does it maybe more comfortably belong in Escape from LA, or even Big Trouble in Little China? I think that the comedy and the goofiness hurts, which would have been a fairly biting, ahead of its time science fiction film. And I think part of the problem might be Roddy Piper. I think he's adequate, but I don't think he's an amazing actor.
No, he's an action hero. He's got the same amount of thespian talents as, dare I say, Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Yeah. It's like he's got this vibe of listen to me or I'll beat you up. He's got this bully charisma, I guess. But I think that the other actors around him are good. Meg Foster's solid. What's his name? Keith David.
I have a small confession to make. I have a new man crush, by the way.
Yeah?
Keith David is so good. And this guy's had like a story.
Is he your new Cole Hauser?
He is definitely my new Cole Hauser. He's so yesterday, old Cole.
Well, see, Keith David has that voice.
Exactly. Keith David is actually, he's had quite the career too. He's been in Platoon. Do you remember the Puppet Masters?
Oh, yes.
I saw that recently again. He's also in that. He's got that creepy cameo in Requiem for a Dream. He's really good in this. He's in The Thing. He's Giles, is he not?
That's right.
Yeah.
I believe so.
This is his second movie, by the way.
Oh, really?
Yeah. He made The Thing and then expected more offers after that and did nothing. And then John Carpenter decided to give him another juicy role. He's really good in this movie.
I think that we have to discuss it too, because there's a very famous fight sequence in this movie.
It does. It has about a 6.5 minute fight sequences that they practiced for a couple of weeks on end, I believe.
This is another, I think in a way, this encapsulates what is both strong and weak about this movie simultaneously.
Yeah.
Because at some point it just becomes ridiculous and funny, that fight.
Yeah.
And what is the fight? What instigates this violence?
Them trying to put on sunglasses.
He tells Keith David that he needs to put on these glasses, that he will understand what he's trying to explain to him if he puts these glasses on.
Yeah.
And Keith David says, no, fuck you.
Yeah.
And he is not willing to do it. He's absolutely, he will allow himself to be pile drived onto concrete before he is even willing to admit the possibility of what this guy's saying being true.
Yeah.
There is some strong satire there.
Yeah.
But nobody fucking thinks about that because they're too busy going, why the fuck is this fight going on like this? Why is it going on for so long? Yeah. We don't get the why very clearly. We just get this fight. Yeah. And I think that, Roddy Piper being an ex-wrestler is very proficient at that stuff. And they sort of treated it as a fight.
Yeah.
But the real struggle is that some people like the blinders.
Yeah.
That's not established in Keith David's character.
Yeah.
It's just obstinance. He just doesn't wanna.
Yeah.
In a way, how interesting would it be if he knew or suspected this was the case, but was willing to play ball or just, as long as I'm fed and me and mine are taken care of, whatever is the big scheme out there is the big scheme out there. I just gotta look after me.
Yeah.
Then it would have been strong. Then I would have said, yes, this makes sense.
Yeah.
as it stands, it's just this ridiculous fight scene that goes on way too long and becomes uncomfortable and funny.
It's interesting to note that the reason why, at least in Carpenter's view, the reason why he wanted to have this extended fight sequences is he wanted to show, apparently, the love that these two characters had for each other, the strong friendship. It's sort of a weird explanation for this, what is a very long and...
From a story point, I have to believe, like the original short story that it's based on.
Yeah.
I haven't read it, so I'm
no.
pulling
The wrestling in it is not in the original short story.
It makes sense thematically that it's somebody who doesn't want to see the truth. It's not that they don't know it; they just don't want to see it. Yeah. As long as it's not laid bare in front of them, they can pretend that everything is hunky dory. But that's not how it's played, and that's fairly consistent for the movie.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's funny. And sometimes it's smart, but it's never both at the same time.
Yeah. I can see what you're going with. I guess, yeah.
Well, let's move towards the third act thing. This is full of people that I like. I say Meg Foster has like the most hypnotizing eyes I've ever seen in my life.
They're very welcoming.
One of the only positive things that I will say about Lord of Salem is that he cast Meg Foster. I haven't seen her in so long, and she's obviously a lot older now. But those eyes,
they're pretty sharp.
Yeah, she definitely represents, I think, a clearer vision of what we were talking about there. In that, either she'd always known, or she decided to play ball. But she's the turncoat.
Oh, she's always known. Hence, for spoiler, her big betrayal at the end. Yeah.
She leads the evil to the base of the rebels, where a lot of innocents or quote-unquote good guys are gunned down. Yeah. And she quite coldly executes one of the main characters in the final minutes of the movie.
Yeah.
And this is another thing that's disparate about the movie. And I'm going to go ahead and drop some major spoilers for They Live. This was made in 1988, so everybody just get over it.
Yeah.
I mean, watch it if you want to. I mean, I'm not saying you shouldn't watch it. I think it's an interesting movie. It's just not one of my favorites. But it's interesting because Roddy Piper has that attitude that I'm bulletproof. I will see this through to the end. Yeah. And he is successful in, at least briefly, exposing the alien subterfuge. But it costs him his life.
Joe Everyman is sacrificed for... I do want to say the greater good in a lot of ways, but
he succeeds in destroying the satellite feed, so everybody who is an alien is exposed as an alien.
Yeah.
But it's so strange because it should be this big shocking moment that our anti-hero is gunned down and he's laying there dead. Like, this should be an impactful moment.
Yeah.
And it's followed up by titties. This woman is riding on top of her boyfriend and looks down and realizes that she's sleeping with an alien.
Yeah.
And the alien looks up at her and says, "What's the matter, baby?" Slam! Credits. All of the impact of the fact that our hero sacrificed our life to save the day is kind of undone by a joke moment to slam in on the credits. Yeah. And again, I think it's fairly symbolic of the flaw of the whole movie. It's just like, it was trying to be two things at once. And not so very successfully. It was doing one of those things at a time in any given scene, I felt. Is it a complete write-off? No. Is it a bad movie? No.
Yeah.
It's well made. I like the acting in it. And as a popcorn Saturday afternoon movie, you can do a lot worse than They Live.
Yeah.
But it's interesting because it's got all this stuff that Carpenter plays with regularly. And it is a fairly quintessential Carpenter movie. And I think it's kind of a flawed one.
Well, what's interesting to note about this movie, because I do agree with you with the ending. The ending seems sort of a little bit off and almost, I don't want to say like they ran out of money, but it definitely goes
There's something
against,
abrupt about it.
Yeah. And that doesn't work. What's interesting to note about this movie is that this movie opened up number one and stayed number one for 3 weeks.
And they pulled it out of the theaters.
And then it just disappeared from the top 10. No other movie's ever done that. It's sort of interesting. And this movie has, as people don't know this, but it has made an imprint on at least pop culture. To this day, still people unaware of this, you'll see them wearing these T-shirts or bunny hugs with "Obey" and,
written across it.
Other stuff like that. Like it's managed to stay very much part of our consciousness in some sort of way.
And I think
there's something to this movie that people
The satire was, like I
Yeah.
said, ahead of its time as far
Yeah.
as how far down this road we're getting in the
Yeah.
media-controlled environment. As
Yeah.
we're told what the news is.
Yeah.
You know, and we're told what we should be worried about this week.
Yeah.
And, we're told, it's a really bad thing that this is happening, so let's all be worried about that. You know, there might be a malaria outbreak. Let's be scared of that this week. There's always something to be distracting us from the real social injustices that are going on, and the fact that they were calling shenanigans on that in a sort of major studio picture makes this movie interesting.
Yeah.
I just wish they were a little better at it.
It was sort of interesting that I rewatched this movie over the Christmas holidays, and about a couple days later, Oxfam released that article about the 3% of the world population controls more wealth than the rest of people combined.
Yeah.
I found that very interesting. That came out while I was rewatching this movie. I think Carpenter is right in he's telling that the rich are the small elite group that are deliberately and will lie, cheat, steal, and kill to maintain that much money and that much power.
It's not even just to be wealthy. It's to be more wealthy than to have money that they could never ever spend.
Yeah.
As long as they're having more and other people are having less, they sleep more comfortably. It seems like it's strange. It's strange, and it's the same kind of corporate greed that you can see will justify. Yeah, we'll be putting a few 100,000 people out of work, but we'll make a few $100 more million this year.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
That kind of awful nihilistic cynicism is what he speaks out against. And I agree with him 100%. And I agree that media manipulates us, And I think that it deserves a smart, brutal, incisive, satirical look. And I think that the bubblegum lines, as funny and charming as they are, kind of take away from the message.
Yeah.
So that was 6 John Carpenter movies ranked. Well, not yet ranked, reviewed. We're about to rank. I got ahead of myself there.
Yeah.
And it's, other than they're directed by John Carpenter, and they have, a lot of them are scored by Carpenter, I think it's a fairly different bunch of Carpenter movies.
Yeah.
And again, the most anomalous thing is that there's nothing genuinely scary here. We don't have a Prince of Darkness or a thing, in here.
There's no In the Mouth of Badness.
These are mainly some of his more popcorn fare movies, and so I like that. It's a little bit different for rank and review, so I like it. So I'm curious to see how this ranks. I got good feelings about this episode. What was your number 6 and why?
Well, number 6 is obviously Dark Star. It's a student film, so you kind of gotta keep that in mind. But its flaws are glaring and well out there, and it suffers from some pacing problems. So, number 6 is Dark Star. This is where it gets tricky because some of these movies have such great elements to them, but there are other things that sort of take you out of the movie.
Something's got to be in 5th place. So yeah.
And I'm surprised to put this here because my love for this movie has grown over time, and that is Assault on Precinct 13.
Oh wow.
It's the fact that, and you can tell that Carpenter hasn't quite learned to communicate with his actors quite well. It's very, I'm going to put the camera here, and I know how to talk about, film language with, the building of suspense and whatnot. But the actor who plays Napoleon is really bad in this movie, and it kind of takes me out of it. It's got too many clunky lines like "gotta smoke." That's supposed to be this big punchline, like this dun dun.
Yeah.
So, and like I said, I really, really enjoy Assault on Precinct 13. He's clearly got a smaller budget here that he's working with, and I get that. There's just, like I said, and it's hard because, like, if you were to ask me on a different day, it might move up in the rank, and I already can tell that this is where we already are going to differ. But number 5, and it pains me to say this, that it is Assault on Precinct 13.
All right.
Number 4 is Escape from New York, which is strange considering that a lot of people sort of, consider this one of his stronger, in his whole collection.
High watermark,
Great idea with the whole that New York is a giant prison. The set design is outstanding with this movie. Suffers a little bit once again from the whole pacing thing. Great mood, great atmosphere. I mean, that's one thing about a John Carpenter movie. He's definitely a master of creating mood and that kind of foreboding atmosphere where people are drawn by fate almost to this forbidding doom.
Right.
So number 4 is Escape from New York. The reason why Starman is here is that the performances are so good, mostly by Karen Allen. So number 3 is Starman. It's definitely the most out of place from the rest of the Carpenter movies, just because it's a happy ending, and that doesn't usually happen with a Carpenter film. It takes a completely ridiculous story, and the actors make it totally believable. And I still get teary-eyed, I'm not ashamed to say, by the ending. It's, the whole...
It's got an aw shucks quality.
It does. And, yeah, it's definitely 80s. It's definitely stuck in that time, but it still pulls at the heartstrings. And I think that is credit really to the performances, and I mean, to the story writing as well. But both, like, Karen Allen totally owns this movie. She's kind of like Dee Wallace in a lot of ways. Not enough love goes to someone like Dee Wallace, who was in E.T. and Cujo, and you kind of go, how come you weren't as big as...
You can sell almost any scenario, and I believe you emotionally. No matter how ridiculous, I believe you.
Yeah, and that's the sign of a good actor to me. So, number 3 is Starman. They Live, I think, is a lot smarter than a lot of people give it credit for, and I love the anger in this movie. I agree with you that there's some things that take you out of this picture, like that fight sequence and the ending, but I like the sneaky nature of this movie. And I do agree that this movie was ahead of its time.
Yeah.
So that's why it ranks higher. Its footprint on our cultural fabric is there, and people don't even realize it. Like I mentioned earlier about those clothes and whatnot. And this film has found an audience. I mean, it was a hit. I mean, that's the thing.
Yeah.
But people, an audience keeps on coming back to this movie. There's a reason why there's maybe not a Criterion release, but they definitely got that big,
Well, I just bought it basically for this podcast, and it was not hard to put my hands to a copy of this almost 35-year-old movie.
Yeah.
So it's around. It's in the public consciousness for sure.
Yeah. And of course, number 1 without a doubt is Big Trouble in Little China.
Yeah.
This
I
movie,
think we kind of showed our hand a little bit in our review.
Yeah.
But,
this movie goes very hard out of its way to make Lee happy. And I love it for it. There's not one thing I would change about this movie. I'm surprised how good this movie is, and it still works.
Big Trouble in Little China has truly stunning rewatchability.
Yeah.
I have watched the shit out of that movie, and I could watch it right now.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no.
I'm not going to argue with that.
Yeah.
Well, I came into this thinking that this might be the one, Lee, where you and I went 6 for 6, but that's not going to be the case.
It was hard. Like I said, these movies could have, I'd say, from like 5-1, 5-2 even, is where they're so close.
Well, this is the list and I felt it out. This is where it intuitively made sense to me. Number 6, we 100% agree, is Dark Star.
Yeah.
For all of its rough charm, it is a student film disguised as a feature.
Yeah.
And of all the movies on the list, if I could say there's one that you could probably go without watching and not really be missing out on the Carpenter experience.
Yeah.
That's the one. I'm not saying don't watch it, but I'm saying it is clearly the least of this, and probably the least of his work. Maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe I need to watch Village of the Damned again, but we'll see.
Yeah.
In 5th position, I put Escape from New York. Now, I'm a fan of Escape from New York. It sounded like I was being super hard on it. In a way, I think it walks that line in a better way than They Live did.
Yeah.
But I think that They Live had more things going for it in that it was smarter and it was more ahead of its time. So I gave it a little bit more of an edge for that.
Yeah.
In 4th position, I put Starman. It's completely well realized. He did service to the script, solid acting.
Yeah.
It's just, of this selection of movies, it's probably the most removed from my typical fare, what Larry typically likes to watch.
Yeah.
This is fine. It is totally fine.
Yeah.
Watch it.
Yeah.
But there it is. They Live, I made it to third place. And when I originally sat down to watch these 6 movies, I imagined They Live being much lower on the list.
Yeah.
And I still, as I said in my review, have my scruples with it. But it's one of these movies, because it's so close to being something really special, it's kind of frustrating almost for me. Like, it's just walking that line, so... Ugh.
Yeah.
But here's where we most strongly disagreed about the bunch, because all the way at second place, I put Assault on Precinct 13.
Really?
I don't know. I was impressed by it. I think I was the most emotionally involved with it in a lot of ways. I laughed and enjoyed myself watching, Big Trouble in Little China, but I don't have to take my feet off the floor, and I don't feel my body clenching up.
Yeah.
And there is something visceral about the experience of Assault on Precinct 13. It is preposterous, and I can't even really make a compelling argument against that.
Yeah.
But the stakes make it very compelling for me.
Yeah.
And yeah, that Napoleon dude, the anti-hero guy, is laying it on pretty thick.
Yeah.
But this is an archetype that he will continue to play with right up to Ghost of Mars. You know?
And I mean, that's the thing. Ghost of Mars is essentially Assault on Precinct 13. Yeah.
Again, a much, much worse version of it.
Yeah.
But we see all of the seeds that make Carpenter really great in his first feature, and that shit impresses me. Yeah. So it surprises me that it ranked that high for me, but there it is. And yes, as discussed, in first position, I think the genuine classic, Big Trouble in Little China.
Yeah.
It's a completely batshit movie, but just because it's crazy doesn't mean it shouldn't be a classic. Period. No exclamation.
No.
All right, so we've changed into our tuxes.
Yep.
So now it is time to give out some Jerry Awards.
Oh, yeah.
I think that we're going to give an honorary Best Director award, Jerry, to John Carpenter.
Yeah.
The fact that we dedicated an episode to him, in my mind, makes him a Jerry Award-winning director. So,
he deserves some love.
Congratulations, John Carpenter. I think we've probably seen the end of his film career. The last film he made was The Ward. We'll probably get to it one day on Rank and Review. And though not a flawless movie, I'm glad that he finished with that and not Ghosts of Mars. I'll say that.
Yeah. Anyways.
So congratulations, John Carpenter, for your Jerry Award. The rest of the Jerry Awards this week will be given out by Lee Beckman.
All right. Well, the first category of the 2015 Jerry's John Carpenter selection is Best Kill. And the nominees are... Drum roll. The ice cream truck death of the little girl from Assault on Precinct 13.
That would be the one to beat.
Yep. The surprise death down in the caves, if you will.
Yes.
I see you no more.
Yeah, this is like this total red shirt character. I don't think he even spoke a line of dialogue.
From Big Trouble in Little China.
He just looks in the wrong cave and is devoured.
and the Adrienne Barbeau death scene from Escape from New York.
Yeah, she's a little bit disappointed to how things have played out for her boyfriend. So she decides to stay behind and try and buy them some time. And ends up getting squashed. Pretty ugly.
I gotta say, I think you'll agree with me on this, but the sudden death scene of the girl from Assault on Precinct 13.
Pretty shocking and impactful. And sort of establishes that there's no rules to this particular picture.
Yeah.
So
it's the clear winner. Yeah. It's true out there. The next award is the what the fuck moment from John Carpenter's oeuvre. Anyways, the scene we have is the exploding dude from Big Trouble in Little China.
Yes, we discussed him and sort of blowing up like a balloon and then popping lettuce and spinach everywhere. It looked green to me.
You definitely got to shake your head and gotta go, what?
What just happened, you guys?
The rape scene from Escape from New York. Snake Plissken comes across some gang members who are having their way with this woman who's just sort of standing there almost out of it against the wall. And Snake kind of makes a decision, you know, that I don't have time for this, and simply walks away, leaving this woman basically to her fate.
Bizarre scene.
Yeah. It works. It's haunting and it's brutal. And of course, the almost 6.5 minute wrestling match that comes in They Live, that feels very much out of place from an already very bizarre and all over the map kind of movie.
Yeah. And between that and the ending, you're saying, right?
Yeah, that's true. Also, the sort of weird sex scene at the end that sort of bookends this movie.
Yeah, like cumulatively, I think the most what the fuck moment should probably go to one of the They Lives.
Yeah.
But that death in a movie that is already crazy and off the hook, that death in Big Trouble in Little China is really out there.
Yeah.
So I will err to your judgment.
Once again, it's hard. I'm just going to say that, especially because they practiced so long on it, but that fight scene in They Live, and it's legendary. You start talking about bizarre and sort of, you know, classic fight scenes in movies, and somehow that always shows up. Is that long fight sequence in They Live. I
don't know if it built
love
up
it, hate it.
I don't know if it built up any homoerotic tension between those two characters, but built up something in me.
And on that note, and last but not least, we'll get to Best Actor. And the nominees are Karen Allen for Starman, Kurt Russell as the legendary Jack Burton. A little shout out to our Canadian boy, Charles Martin Smith. Keep making those movies, my brother.
Yeah.
And just because I love him and he's my new man crush, I'm going to say Keith David for They Live.
Well, I think the honest answer is Karen Allen, but I'd be tempted to give a cumulative to Kurt Russell. He's a regular collaborator with John Carpenter, and I do think it does represent some of his best work.
Yeah.
Maybe not Snake Plissken, but I definitely think his work in The Thing and in Big Trouble in Little China. I mean, it's not easy to play... somebody who's so confidently making a fool of themselves all the time. I think that it was a genuinely good comedic performance.
It walks a brilliant line.
But Karen Allen brought real raw emotion to a script that almost didn't deserve it in some ways. So that's the honest winner. But I mean, if you gave it to Russell, I wouldn't complain either.
It's hard because they're really two different performances, and it kind of shows how mistreated comedy really is. Karen Allen is so good in Starman. I don't know. Like I said, I was blown away by her performance in this movie. So I'm going to be honest and give it to her. But it's hard voting down what I think is one of the great sci-fi action characters that is Jack Burton.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
We just can't say enough good things about Jack Burton or Big Trouble in Little China.
Yeah.
If for some reason this podcast is reaching your ears and you have not seen Big Trouble in Little China,
stop what you're doing right now. Just stop it. Put it down. Go to, whether you've got Netflix.
Seek it out.
If you've got a friend you know has have it, stop what you're doing. Put it in your DVD player and enjoy the next 2 hours because you're in for a treat.
You may not love it as much as Lee and I do. I don't know, who you are, who we're talking to. But I will say this. I want to build an audience for this podcast.
Yeah.
So if somebody out there watches this movie and they hadn't seen it before and upon watching it find nothing in it of charm or of value entertainment-wise,
you're dead.
Stop the fuck listening to my podcast.
You're dead to me. You know what? There's something wrong with you if you don't like this movie. I'm just gonna come out and say it.
You might not be enthusiastic about it, but if you don't see like some sort of simple, basic charm to it, then I don't know.
I think if you don't like this movie, you're the kind of person who likes to drown little kittens. That's what I'm gonna say.
Thank you for once again returning.
Hey man, thanks
my most frequent.
Thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here.
Yeah. John Carpenter. Here's to him.
He's the man.
was 6 John Carpenter films ranked, reviewed, and put behind us. I hope you enjoyed that special episode of Rank and Review, and I hope you'll enjoy further episodes of Rank and Review. I drop every 2 weeks on Wednesday. And please do spread the word about Rank and Review. Send any feedback you'd like to rankandreview@gmail.com. Seek out the website rankandreview.ca, and you can leave comments directly there. And tell a fellow film nerd that you found a cool podcast. Well, I guess you'll be hearing me next time. Bye-bye.